Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Lynn Drinkwater, and I'm the SEC Program Coordinator here. And I love doing these types of presentations, especially when it's Dr. Sullivan. And I was thinking this morning when I woke up, I was brought to mind the movie The Field of Dreams, because when you schedule Karen Sullivan, they will come, as you see. And I'm sure there'll be more people trickling in, but Karen's time is important, and I just want to get this party started. So we are live streaming this on our YouTube channel, which will then be parked as a video. So if there's something that you miss, or you're like, what did she say again? You can go back and kind of see that. And if you go to Karen's actual website, she has a plethora of brain type of videos available to you. And she also has the 2-hour lecture version of this topic on her website as well. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Karen Sullivan now, and I love the color of your shoes.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me with the mic? Is the mic on? I was thinking how long Lynn and I have known each other. I've known Lynn when she had red hair. That goes back, reddish brown. Exactly. But the Senior Center is really the place that I first started doing talks. It'll be 10 years that I've been in Pinehurst in November. So when I first started, nobody really had an idea of neuropsychology and how it might be able to help people. And the first thing I wanted to do was find the local senior center and figure out where I could get in front of a group of people and empower them about science-based brain health. And Lynn made it really easy for me. And so we did Memory Mondays here for a couple of years. So I'll always have a special place in my heart for what they offer here. It's really amazing. So you guys realize you're in an exclusive group here. You're the 100 people that got into the talk. You realize you're in a special group there. Did any of you happen to see me at the Ruth Pauley lecture? Oh my gosh. So I was wondering if some of you guys were like repeat customers. I figured what it might be is some of people who came told their friends, and then people kind of heard it was an interesting talk. I think it's very, very interesting and very hopeful because it represents a evidence-based way of impacting brain health. So my hope for you today is not only do you find this to be super, super interesting, because some of the facts I'm going to tell you about how your brain and your gut are connected are truly mind-blowing, but you also walk away with some very practical action steps that are going to help you make different decisions in the way that you eat, because it really directly impacts the health of your brain. I also know a lot of you are known to me through seeing me in my practice, and part of what I had to cut out to be able to make this realistic for today was how we're trying to apply gut health to issues like dementia and stroke. And so that is more a part of the one that I have on my website. I'll tell you a little bit about it at the end, but it's probably going to be, gut health is probably going to be an offered FDA approved intervention within a very short amount of time. So probably in 3 to 5 years from now, if you have a stroke, you're probably going to be offered a gut health intervention for treatment. And that is going to be in the form of a fecal matter transplant. So you start to use your imagination with that one. Yes, I'm saying poop transplant. That is going to be an option for you. And right now that might sound not only gross, but weird. But by the end of this talk, you're going to understand how much what happens in our intestines impacts our brain. So you guys are ready to learn, right? Okay. So the first thing we have to kind of accept together as human beings is something that is a little difficult to swallow. But the truth is to be human is to be covered in microorganisms. Okay, and the way we think about germs right now, I hope, is very different from the way we think about it when I'm done talking. So right now, we still are buying into this idea that germs and bacteria are something that we need to eradicate, and that being clean and pristine is the only way, and that's the way to go. But the truth is, germs are actually very, very helpful to us. So the way that our biology is organized is that not only do we have some microbes, but we have colonies, millions upon billions of microbes on us anywhere that our body interacts with the environment. Okay, so what that basically means is yeasts, parasites, fungi, protozoa, and bacteria. So what I'm really going to focus on today is bacteria. 9 out of the 10 cells in our bodies are microbes. Okay, so we are more than 90% bacteria. That alone starts the mind to really open up, right? It's absolutely incredible. So in the last 5 years, gut health has really become a big focus when we think about chronic disease. And look at all of these different conditions, and I think we can all put ourselves in one of these categories. Every single one of these medical diagnoses can be traced back to either cause being gut health or it being worsened by gut health, okay? So think about metabolic, that's diabetes, right? Cardiovascular could be high cholesterol, hypertension, liver, anything related to digestion, cancer, obesity, autoimmune issues, neurological and mental health. So pretty much anything that can go wrong in the human body has a direct link back to gut health. And what has been our weapon of choice? What has gotten us into this situation? It's basically what we choose to put on our fork every day. The problem is we live in a culture that really prioritizes quick processed food. So by the time we get to and you start to hear some statistics about how our own nervous system doesn't even recognize processed food as food, I think you're going to have a lot more insight into how we got into so much trouble. So when we talk about talking about a pretty complex system, and you can basically think about it that it's from where the food goes in to where the food goes out. But when you read about gut health, what we're really focusing on is the 2 intestines, the small intestine and the large intestine. And the first fact that I want to give you that I think is going to absolutely amaze you is that in the pathway from the mouth all the way to the end point for food, we actually have a second brain. There are over 100 million brain cells that line the mouth all the way through to the rectum. Is that not absolutely amazing, right? So brain cells don't just live in your brain, they actually are all throughout the digestive system. But the research has mostly been done on the intestines because the product of the intestines, which is stool, is testable. All of this revolution that we're going to talk about today, we really owe a huge debt of gratitude to fecal matter. I know that's ridiculous, but that's the way it is. So what happens in the small intestine? So that is the inner part. Let me see if I have a little clicker here. I don't think I do. The inside part here is the small intestine. That's where we absorb most of the nutrients of our food. And then when it gets passed to the large intestine, which is also called the, oh, perfect. That one, oh, I gotcha. So that's the small intestine there, okay? And food passes pretty intact throughout the small intestine. Once it gets up to the large intestine, this is where we actually absorb all of the nutrients. So this is where we take the water, the electrolytes. This is where we transform food into nutrition. So it's kind of the epicenter of digestion, okay? And if you were to take out the small and large intestine, measure them, they are actually about 20 to 30 times the size of your physical body. So it is a whole lot of surface area smashed into a very small area. And actually, once you start to think about the gut and the brain, there's a lot of similarities. So one of those similarities is exactly that. So if we were to take out our brain matter and stretch it out and measure it, it would be about 20 to 30 feet. And the reason it's smushed in there so much and it's kind of got all those bumps and up and downs is to get more surface area into a very small area of space. So the size of the brain and the size of the intestines are actually incredibly similar. So they're almost about 3.5 pounds each. It almost gets right down to the ounce. So when we start to study gut health and we start to talk about bacteria, what we're talking about is the microbiome. So this is what is the colony of bacteria that is actually living within our large and our small intestine. And so this has become such a hot topic for scientists that they call it the overlooked organ. So we now actually think of the bacteria that lives in the gut as being its own organ system. So it's the latest. It's just like how we discover new planets every couple of years, right? So now we've said that the microbiome is actually an organ. It's right up there with the kidneys and the liver. Like I said, very similar in weight to the brain. And one of the things I think is most interesting is that our microbiome changes very, very rapidly depending on what we just ate 24 hours ago. But it also has a foundation that it defaults to during times of distress. So I'm going to tell you in 2 slides from now, how is it that we develop that foundation? But first, I want you to understand you've probably heard these terms, good bacteria and bad bacteria. So I want you to understand what it means. I think it's more helpful to think about it like harmful bacteria and protective bacteria, right? Good and bad kind of has like a moral judgment associated with it. So we are absolutely teeming in these microbes in our gut, and they are a combination of the not so good and the health helpers. So in the harmful gut bacteria, I want you to understand their personality, okay? So health herders are very opportunistic and they're bullies. These bad bacteria basically come early to the party and stay late at the party, okay? They're very aggressive. They don't take subtle hints very well, and they're very, very selfish. So they're always just thinking about how they're going to continue living. They're not really interested in contributing to our health. They are there to help themselves and their friends. When we have an overproduction of the health herder bacteria, this is where we get symptoms. This is what we think irritable bowel syndrome is. This is where we think bloating and gas comes from, is that it's just too much of the negative bacteria, and it does damage over time. The protective bacteria, in contrast, is very delicate. This is your wallflower at the party. This is the one that has to be coaxed out and coaxed into staying. This is the good stuff. This is what we want to support. And every day, these these bacteria need to be fed. That's how they're an organism, live cells that need food. And what we eat determines which one of these bacteria get fed. Okay, so we want to be promoting more of the protective health helpers because they are the ones that do things like take the nutrients out of our food. Okay, they are the ones that break down food into the micronutrients that we can then absorb in our gut and derive health from. These are the ones that discourage the bad bacteria from taking over, but they are very, very temporary. They don't stay around for a long time, and they need to be fed in a much different way than the bad bacteria. And that's a big part of what you're going to learn today, is how to feed the good stuff and not feed the bad stuff. So remember before I said we come into gut health with a foundation. It's very flexible in some ways, depending on what we've had to eat in the previous 24 hours, but it is also with us the very beginning of time. So I want to tell you it's about 8 or 9 things that we are born with and in our early years that shape the way your microbiome is even at the age of 90. First one is how you were born. People who were born via C-section have a totally different microbiome than people that were born vaginally. Isn't that interesting? And part of it is because one of the reasons birth happens in the way it does is so that the mother's microbiome is the very first thing the child interacts with. And this is either through secretions or, as many of you who have had a baby know, and some of you men who may have been there at the time, you know that oftentimes the mother does poop a little bit when she's pushing out the baby. And the purpose of that is to actually get into the baby's mucous membranes to transfer the microbiome from the mother to the child. Isn't that interesting? And so it's like I am hesitant to throw poop around too many times, but it's relevant and it's interesting. So when you're born with C-section, it's basically a very antiseptic environment. And so the very first microbes that your body interacts with are potentially super germs that are in the hospital environment. And that actually sets up the microbiome to go down a completely different path. The next one is the very first foods that you are given. So again, breast milk has some very specific good bacteria in it for a reason. And this is contrasted with formula that is, we try to make it as close to breast milk as we can, but of course, nothing can ever replicate that. So that makes a difference. The next one is if you grew up with a childhood pet, especially a pet that went outside and came back into the house. Isn't that interesting? The next one is how many primary caregivers you had. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of this. So if you were always at home, let's just say with a single mother, you're only exposed to a very narrow window of bacteria from her, right? If you go to daycare and you have 4 or 5 caregivers plus all of those kids, think of all the different germs those kids are exposed to. So what happens is in the short term, those kids who go to daycare, as we all know who've had kids, they get sick a whole lot more than the kid who stays home for the first 5 years. But when you track the health of those people throughout their entire lives, the kids who were exposed to more bacteria have much less autoimmune disorders. So this has been most proven in multiple sclerosis. So that's actually a risk factor for developing MS, is being at home alone with 1 or 2 caregivers for the first 5 years of your life. Isn't that interesting? People who go to daycare actually get less flu over their whole entire lifespan than people who didn't. Okay, so one of the things I hope you're slowly picking up about gut health is diversity and exposure is actually a good thing during many times of our lives. Not always, but especially as we're laying this early foundation, where it's actually better in the long term when we expose babies to all sorts of different things. The reason the pet going outside matters is all of the cooties that the pet's picking up on when they go outside come back in, and the kids all over the pet, so they absorb them. The next one is our age. Even after about age 21, our gut health does start to become a little bit less vibrant. And as we get into our 70s and 80s, we just have less diversity of gut health. Now, that's very interesting because the question is that biology? Is that genetic? Is that the way it is? Or is it because by the time we're older, we have very set foods that we like? One of the things I hope you learn from me today is that it's very, very important to eat a big variety of foods. Many people who come to see me as a brain health doctor, when they're into brain health and they're excited to tell me all the good things they're doing, people love to tell me about their blueberries in the morning, right? And blueberries have a lot of evidence base. That's true. But from a gut health perspective, it would be much better to one day have raspberries, the next day have blackberries, the next day to have apple, right? For gut health, it's very, very important that we mix it up. And so I'm going to go through the handouts that we created for all of you at the end and help you understand how is it. I think you guys got those, right? Oh, Lynn, what's going on with the handouts? Yes. Oh, you're going to get them at the end. Yes. Okay. Oh, that's true. That's true. That's true. So you're going to get 2 handouts when we're done. You have 2 or 1? Yeah. I think you have the top 10 foods for gut health. The next one is like a food diary to get 30 different foods in a week. Thank you. She's so good. The quality of the water that you drink and the quality of the air that you breathe. These things all filter through the gut and make a difference in the bacteria that lives in there. This next one is super interesting. This is your life experience with antibiotics. So 3 things matter: how early you took them. So what was the earliest age you first got a dose of antibiotics? How recently have you taken one? And then how many have you taken over your lifetime? So many of us know the way antibiotics work is that they obliterate everything, right? They can't go in and just get rid of the bacteria, right? They take everything with it. So when we have antibiotics, it takes about a year to rebuild your microbiome. Now, you can facilitate that by doing some of the things we're going to talk about at the end of the talk. And that's why I'm talking about this, because it's very important to know what to do. But we haven't yet incorporated gut health into our everyday health conversations, right? Because maybe that's the first time you've heard that piece of data. And I think that's a really important thing to know, because again, once you reduce all the bacteria, you're getting rid of a lot of the workers that give us many aspects of our health, including our brain health. The other thing is stress. The stomach and mental health really go hand in hand. I mean, think about how many metaphors we have for butterflies in the stomach, or I'm going to lose my cookies, or think about how it feels when you're super anxious, right? Where you don't feel it in your knees, right? You feel it in your gut. And so there's a book that's written about gut health called, what is the name of it? It's called not the second brain, but the emotional brain. That's what it's called. And it's basically saying that we have two brains. This one is more cognitive and this one is more emotional. I think that's kind of an interesting concept. And then the most influential one is that previous 24 hours of diet. So that's a big part of what we're going to focus on today. So this is some nitty-gritty science that we're going to hopefully talk about in a way that is understandable, because this is the mechanism of gut health. This is how it really all happens. So by now, you guys know on my left-handed graphic there, the inside is the small intestine and the outside is the large intestine, right? So if you cut those right down the middle and you looked at the inside of either one, what you're going to find is that circle there, that next one right here. And inside all of these little, they kind of look like little peninsulas or lakes here, is this. And on the outside of all those little lakes are things called villi. And each villi is one little cell stacked right up against the other. And there you can kind of visualize them a little bit of a different way. This is what does the work of either absorbing or repelling bacteria. So what we want to do is we want to absorb the good stuff, but we want to have a strong enough barrier to repel the bad stuff, okay? And so each one of these little tiny intestinal walls contains about 25,000 of these little villi. So that's, if you just took one teeny tiny little slice from there, each one would have 25,000 absorption tools. That's how you can kind of think of the villi, okay? And the villi, like I said, they can either absorb or they can become a barrier. And so this slide here basically explains it all. So on the left is when your gut wall is healthy, you have more good bacteria than bad. So the thing is, it's all about a balance. You're never not going to have bad bacteria in your gut. It's not possible. The biodiversity says we need both. But what we care about is the balance. We want more of the good than we do the bad. And we can do that by what we feed the germs, what we give ourselves to eat. So when we're eating well and our gut wall is intact, we have this situation here. So these are those little small intestine, large intestine cells. And when everything is working good, this is the critical biological concept that right here, we have a little tiny lock that is ironclad. And these little tiny balls of bacteria here cannot get through. It's basically like a fortress. Now, when we have gut health that's not so good, what happens is those little tiny barriers or locks basically get broken and they open up. So instead of having little soldiers that are back to back here and can guarantee that nothing gets through, we start to get gaps in between. And this is what is called leaky gut. Maybe some of you have heard that concept before. Now, here's the problem with leaky gut is now the bacteria, instead of being protected and staying away from the blood vessel that's down here, now it actually sinks in and it gets absorbed into our system. So what happens in the gut doesn't just stay in the gut. It now leaks in to our bloodstream. That's what we don't want. Now, the reason we don't want that is because it causes inflammation, okay? And right underneath the blood vessels, as you know, hello?
Yes. When you want to capture someone's attention.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So when we are healthy and we're on this side here, the blood flow gets to stay completely clean, if you will, and we have no inflammation here. And so the messages that are getting to the brain cell is that everything is okay, everything is safe, everything is in the right place. When we've got the leaky gut and the bacteria is seeping into the blood doesn't want this. So the immune system in the body basically creates an alarm and gives the body a signal that says danger. There's something down here that shouldn't be here. And this is what causes the message of inflammation. Is that clear? Okay, I know it's a lot to take in. Okay, so you've probably heard of the gut-brain axis. So now you understand what's happening at the level of the gut. I want to help you understand how it's connected to the brain. So it is physically attached, okay? So it's physically attached through a set of bidirectional feedback loops. So this is called the vagus nerve. And what is really interesting about the vagus nerve is that it's not equal in both directions. Okay, so more information is actually going to the brain than is coming from the brain to the gut. But what I want you to know is that each one regulates the other. So 80% of the information in the vagus nerve goes from the gut to the brain, and only 20% goes from the brain to the gut. So start to use your reasoning skills there to think about, okay, well, what is the purpose of this vagus nerve? Clearly, it's very important for the brain what is happening at the level of the gut, right? If 80% of that information is being dedicated to that direction. The way the brain influences the gut is basically through the autonomic nervous system. And how you can really start to think about this is what happens in the brain is very similar to what's happening in the gut, and what's happening in the gut is very similar to what's happening in the brain. So the problem becomes, if we have a state of inflammation in the gut, then what do we think the brain is going to do in turn, since they kind of work together in tandem, right? The brain is going to get the message that there's a problem, that there's inflammation. Now, the thing you have to know about inflammation is there's really two different ways to think about it. Acute inflammation is a really good thing. We would not survive if when we had a cut, the immune system didn't send in specialized cells to clot the blood and to create the scab and to create a barrier with the environment. The way inflammation is supposed to work is just the same way that the stress system is supposed to work. It's supposed to come on and then go back down and only turn back on when it's needed, right? But if we all think of the way we're stressed, do you just get stressed occasionally? No, we all stay in kind of a state of stress, right? So what's really bad for the body and for the brain is chronic inflammation. It's when the inflammation gets a chance to rest and inflammatory cells just get sent over and over again. So the way that you can look at it is it's like a fire that never ever ends. And think how much damage fire would do if it never ever was put out. So inflammation in the gut is sending a message to the brain cells in your gut that there is a threat. Inflammation basically communicates to the brain something is wrong, right? It's really as simple as that. So these signals then travel up to the vagus nerve, and the brain responds by having a stress response. So what that means is the brain is basically getting us ready for fight or flight. Okay, so when we're eating not so good stuff and the intestines are staying inflamed, the brain thinks the same thing is happening to it, and it gets ready to exert a lot of energy to save our lives. And the way it does this is it increases our cortisol. So this is that feeling of always staying stressed out, not really being able to let our guard down. It decreases our serotonin and our dopamine, which are our feel-good neurotransmitters. It raises our blood sugar and it raises our blood pressure. We're constantly staying in a state where we are either ready to fight the tiger or we're ready to book it out of town. That is exhaustion. That is a lot of what scientists now think is the dilemma of the modern day human, is that because our diet has turned so processed and turned away from whole foods, that our gut is living in a state of inflammation, which then gives our brain the message that there's a problem. And we wind up searching how to put out the problem, but we don't really even know what the map is. So the way our immune system responds to this is it tries to send out these inflammatory cells. The job of chronic inflammation is this search to find the problem. So its job is it's trying to trap the bacteria and basically surround it and smother it. That's basically how the immune system works. But what happens is the immune system has a hard time getting into the gut because the surface area is very taken up with brain cells. So it's kind of this chase, this wild goose chase that never really ends. It really can't ever find the solution. And one of the things we know about the immune system and brain health that's very recent, just in the last few years, is that it is a finite resource. Okay, so the immune system in the brain, it's a little different. It's connected to the one in the body, but it's a little specialized in the brain. It has a limited bandwidth. It can't do everything, partially because there's, only so many hours in a day. When the brain's immune system works to its maximum ability is in REM sleep, our deepest sleep. And its primary job is to cut off everything else that it's doing to focus on finding problems and eliminating them. Okay, so that's a really important thing to know, because that's one of the reasons that sleep is so very deeply important. Okay, so I think by now, I hope you're getting that gut inflammation equals brain inflammation, right? And when you have brain inflammation, it's basically a nervous system that stays on high alert, an immune system that never rests and turns on itself. This is the theory of autoimmune disease, that the immune system is searching so hard, so diligently to find a problem it can't find, that it turns on itself, right? So autoimmune disease is basically our own immune system attacks our own cells, right? So I wouldn't want to invade anyone's medical privacy, but you can just kind of think to yourself, if you fall in this category, many of us, I have it, is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's the most common autoimmune condition. About 70% of women have it. And it's got, if you start to track the introduction of processed foods in America with the rate of autoimmune conditions, they almost go completely hand in hand. So there's something that we know is happening there, but we're just starting to get to the point in science that we understand. And what I think we feel, a lot of that other stuff is kind of unconscious and we can't perceive it. But this is the reason a lot of us have a mental restlessness or a feeling of not being able to truly relax, is your nervous system is not relaxed. It feels like it's under threat and it is constantly fighting this chronic inflammation. So that's kind of all of the bad stuff. So the way I like to always do my talks is I like to get you good and whooped up, good and worried, right? And then I want to give you the solution. So now we're going to transition into, okay, all right, Karen, we got it. Pretty bad stuff there. We got the connection. So what is healthy? What's fascinating is we know so much more about what's bad than we know about what's good. Okay, so this is, as of yesterday, I updated myself on the literature, but I'm going to tell you everything that I know. So what we do know is that there are some characteristics that do define an uninflamed and healthy gut. The first one is composition. So what I mean by that is balance. So you want more good than you want bad bacteria. The next one is that the diversity really matters. So we don't want to get into the habit of eating the same things all the time, because the more diversity, the more different gut bacteria are fed. And the final one is that gut wall integrity, trying to really fight against leaky gut and try to have those locks on the villi cell wall as integral as they can possibly be. But what you need to know is that to feed your microbiome requires daily intervention, so it does not default to your foundation. So what I mean by that is, when I went through my list of 8 to 9 things, remember how you were born, what you ate, your caregivers, if all of that for you was in the positive direction, meaning you were born vaginally, you were breastfed, you had a lot of caregivers, you had a childhood pet, you don't have a lot of stress, what that means is your default is actually pretty good, right? So you don't need these interventions as much. If you had a lot of ear infections as a child and you had a lot of antibiotics in your life, or you've had a lot of stress, or you went to a very small school growing up, your default microbiome is not going to be that great. So it's really interesting. It kind of depends on your personal situation to know how aggressive you want to be with my recommendations that I'm going to make today. So here's I know, right? I'll never forget, for some reason, I think I said this at the Ruth Pauley lecture, I'll never forget this picture I saw one time that was of a woman who had recently immigrated to America from Russia, walking into a super grocery store for the first time. And she turned down the potato chip aisle and saw this. This is why I put the picture in to remind me. And this was a person who grew up in a village who actually had never seen potato chips before. So to think that there could be 110 different kinds of potato chips, the look on her face was just, it was just a combination of shock and awe. And so how we've really gotten into trouble with the gut is really our modern day diet. So 73% of the US food supply can be classified as ultra processed. I think that is a very disturbing statistic, right? So when we say ultra processed, what we basically mean is it's food that's made in a factory, not picked farm, right? So it's 52% cheaper than Whole Foods. And that is one of the main problems that we have. And I know there's some really interesting, innovative ways they're trying to help folks who get like food stamps to be able to go to farmers markets instead of, trying to support them instead of going to Walmart, because the money goes further at Walmart. That's just the sad truth. That's part of how we've gotten ourselves in this. So basically, there's almost no nutrients in ultra processed foods, right? Because it's actually not food. It really is relying on extracted oils and starches. It's basically a chemical man-made concoction that is trying to capitalize on the fact that our brain loves a combination of three things: high salt, high sugar, and high fat. Okay, so the food that I've heard has been used as the best example is the donut. Now, who amongst us does not love the glazed donut, right? You don't like it? Oh my gosh. I mean, imagine if you're hungry and someone put a perfectly fresh glazed donut right in front of you. You could almost argue that it starts to call up some of the same feelings of addiction as if it was a cigarette and you were a nicotine smoker or, cocaine. I mean, it's the same exact reward system in the brain that gets activated. The other problem with processed food is that there's almost no fiber in it. So fiber is a really important brain health ingredient that we're going to talk about today. And the issue is, just like it's ultra processed in the way it's made, right? It's made very fast and it's made cheap. That's the same way it runs through our system. It doesn't stick around long. Even if there was nutrition in it, it doesn't stick around long enough for us to break down and for us to absorb the micronutrients. Right? It basically has no motility. It has hypermotility, pardon me. A lot of the additives and preservatives that make food shelf worthy are highly inflammatory. Okay. So one of the simplest things you can start to do as you're thinking about gut health is to try to avoid food that is in a box. Right? They talk about doing the perimeter of the grocery store, right? You want to try to get something as close to its natural state as possible, because the reason it can sit on a shelf for so long is because it's full of preservatives. The other night on the news, I saw a woman pull out a large fry and a Big Mac from McDonald's that she had bought and put in a shoebox 18 years ago. It looked brand new. Brand new. You would have never known it was 18 years old. I know, right? How gross. One of the things I want you to know about bacteria is it's very sensitive to high temperatures, not so much freezing, but high temperatures. As we talk about how to prepare food, we're going to circle back to this, but almost all food processing involves extreme heat, which completely kills the food. So if there was any nutrition in it when it started, there's absolutely none by the time it gets to our plate. The other thing that's very concerning with ultra processed food is how much antibiotics are in our food. Okay, this is a massive problem. So remember what I taught you before about antibiotics. It matters how early you took them, how recently you took them, and how many you've taken in your lives. So we would be naive to think that all that means is how many times has a doctor prescribed me an antibiotic. That's not your exposure. Your exposure actually comes more from food. And the type of food where it really stores is animal fat. Okay. So this is why the whole, sometimes people see, organic meat or grass-fed beef or all of that and wonder what the health benefit is. Health benefit for gut health is that promise would be that no antibiotics have been used, because the reason they're used is the animals can live in extremely poor conditions and never die from bacteria or virus or germs, right? Because they're stuffed full of antibiotics. So they're allowed to keep cheap, poor conditions. So it's an animal rights issue, but also the higher the fat, the more it holds on to antibiotics. So things like heavy cream or half and half that you might put in your coffee. If you're not buying dairy fed or antibiotic free, you're absolutely getting antibiotics in your coffee. I think that's really disturbing. How about this one? The body, so if 73% of our food supply is ultra processed, how about this fact? The body doesn't even recognize it as food. It treats it like a foreign object. It treats it as if we swallowed plastic. We don't have receptors, or our biology isn't trained to identify that food product as food, right? So if you think about like a slice of Velveeta, the brain doesn't go, oh, that's cheese, right? The body is like, I don't know what that is. That's scary. I should probably send out a threat detector to figure out what that is. And again, now we've got our inflammation going, right? You guys good and scared yet? Okay, the other thing is you can't deny that ultra processed foods are very addictive. And if you slow down and you start to think about your food more, I know you're going to feel that. So, I mean, I just think, I always try to make sure you guys know I'm no better than you guys learning this information. This is just, we're all human beings and we're trying to do better, right? So there's definitely times where like, I got 2 teenagers right now, they're stressing me out. And I'm like, you know what would solve this problem today is a McDonald's fry. That, I could go get a Diet Coke, sit in my car, I could pretend I'm on a vacation somewhere. And that's a habit. That's an addiction, because I know it's going to change my brain chemistry so I feel better, right? How many of us can eat one cookie? How many of you can eat one chip, right? There's something about it that really gets that reward center going in the brain. So the problem is that ultra processed foods really, really, really feed the harmful bad bacteria. That is the fuel that the bacteria have to take in order to survive. Sugar is the biggest one, and all of the bad fats, the omega-6s, we'll talk about that later when we get into nutrition, but that's the main way you keep bad bacteria alive, is by eating high sugar, high salt, high bad fat foods. The next one is it kills a lot of the diversity in our microbiome. So the more processed food you eat, remember I said before, they're kind of bullies. That bad bacteria really takes away a lot of the good bacteria. So not only are you feeding the bad stuff, but you're also actively killing the little bit of good stuff that's left. And it disrupts that intestinal wall that we identified before as being so important to keep it locked, right? We want that gate to be as airtight as possible. I had mentioned fiber a minute ago. Good bacteria's favorite food to eat. So I told you the bad stuff likes to eat the sugar, the salt, the fat. So the good stuff, its favorite food is fiber. 95% of us. So if we have 100 people in this room, there would be only 5 people who are getting enough fiber. Pretty interesting, right? So most carbs, proteins, and fats are absorbed before they make it to the large intestine. And what we want is for food to stick around long enough to break down and absorb the micronutrients. The only way food slows down enough is through fiber. So what we want to do is pair eating healthy foods that feed the good with fiber, because the fiber is what helps it stick around, and the good stuff is what breaks down over time and feeds the good bacteria. So the dietary fiber spends a lot more time in that gut wall feeding the positive bacteria. And basically, this is the star of our show. So if you were a scientist studying gut health and brain health, what you would know is that the goal is to have as many of these short chain fatty acids as possible. Okay. But here's the thing. A lot of people will come up to me after this talk and say, well, I get it and I understand why I would want those, but what's the supplement that I could take that would, right? And no, it doesn't work like that. The only way you can do this is through food. There is not a supplement, because it's about the organic, slow breakdown of the food, and supplements aren't food, right? It's a whole different ballgame. So basically, the short chain fatty acids do a lot of good things. They help limit the growth of the bad bacteria, and they then prevent bad bacteria from attaching to the gut wall. That's one of the most important things. And if we can get that goal accomplished, then we can actually absorb nutrients like vitamins. We can synthesize hormones. This is how we get that gut wall to be more secure. And then we can decrease the inflammation. So that's the two steps that are important to not have disease. But the third one is how we actually get to health. So once those two things happen, then we are releasing these short chain fatty acids, which do all the good stuff. This is the essence of health. They're anti-inflammatory, they regulate our immune system, they're anti-obesity, anti-diabetes, anti-cancer, they protect our liver, our heart, and our brain. This is all the good stuff. This is everything we want. If you want to live a long, healthy life, nutritionally, you are going for short chain fatty acids. That is your goal. So would you like to know how to get more of those short chain fatty acids in your diet? I think you would. Okay. So now we're going to talk about how is it that you can take what I've taught you today and actually put it into action. These are the practical steps that I want you to walk away from. The first thing is that I hope you have changed your mind a little bit about the way you think about bacteria. It's not all just icky, right? It's actually beneficial. And we have to promote and befriend the good gut bacteria. So I want you to think of it as having a little smiley face there. The next thing is that I want you to remember that every time you eat, you're making a decision if you're feeding the good stuff or if you're feeding the bad stuff. So your diet is the fuel or the fire to your gut bacteria. Okay, with every food choice, you're either choosing to feed the good or you're choosing to feed the bad. The more you feed your good gut bacteria, the more they are going to help you and contribute to your health. So the more they create those micronutrients, they fortify that gut wall, and most importantly, they communicate that there's no threat here to your brain, so your brain has a chance to just focus on what it needs to do for its own health and mental wellness. So the first thing is that you're going to try to make an effort to choose farm foods over factory foods. Okay, that's your very first line in the sand. So you're going to try to eat more whole foods. So what I mean by that is eating them as close to their original state as possible. Okay, the more local you eat, this is really interesting. So the minute a food is picked or taken off the vine or harvested, it's basically a careening course with the micronutrients dying, right? We all know this. The sooner we eat the food, the more healthy it is, right? So when you go to Harris Teeter and you start looking at where your food came from, and you have a choice of did it come from Brazil or did it come from Laurenburg, you're going to want to go with the local, because the one from another country has maybe spent weeks, if not months, traveling probably by boat. And every single minute that it was en route to get to you is a minute where the nutrients are declining. You don't have to eat all organic, but what I really, really feel strongly about is with animal fat, animal products, that you do try to get the antibiotic-free and the grass-fed milk, eggs, and beef. Okay, so to me, that's a non-negotiable thing now. Now that I understand this, sometimes I don't always eat organic. I mean, it's not possible to do. But when I go to the grocery store and I'm buying half and half for my coffee, you can only find the grass-fed one only comes in a pint. And it's probably about 30% more expensive than the regular stuff. And you can't buy it in a bigger size, so you kind of don't feel like you're getting the value. And so between me and my husband, probably 2 or 3 days, we go through one of those. So it's a little bit of a pain in the neck. But if you understand that you're not being exposed to antibiotics and your whole gut microbiome is being changed, it's a really good motivator. The next one is to eat more plant-based foods. So I just think this stuff is just so fascinating. So 60% of what we eat in the US comes from just 3 crops: wheat, rice, and corn. I was telling Lynn before we started that I've been trying this low carb diet for the last couple of months. And, all that stuff is out for me right now for the next few months. And it is not easy. Wheat, rice, and corn is incredibly prevalent in so many different foods. If you've ever tried to do low carb, it's actually quite the challenge at first, because you start to realize just how prevalent those things are. So remember I said before, we don't know too much about what makes for a good microbiome, but we do know some stuff. So here's the very solid science that I can share with you. So what we know is that over the course of a week, if you can try to eat 30 different plant types in these 5 categories here, this gives our microbiomes much more diversity than if we eat 10. So the bad thing would be if you're, again, eating some of the same things over and over. And the best would be if you could try to get 30 different ones in. So this is within fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and nuts and seeds. So one of the other PDFs that you're going to get is going to be a tracker to help you make a little check mark to try to keep yourself on target. Now, what is important for me that I communicate to you is this doesn't have to be like a whole, if you're trying to incorporate different stuff, it doesn't have to be a giant pile of purple cauliflower. It can literally be one little tiny stalk of purple cauliflower. It can be a mouthful. It doesn't have to be a side dish. It doesn't have to be a main course. So when I started to learn about this, the way I was shopping at the grocery store totally changed. So instead of kind of thinking, being on my phone or talking to somebody and going and getting all my basics, I always got the kale, the lettuce, the carrots. I started to have more fun at the grocery store, be more mindful, and deliberately tried to pick out things that I had never tried before. But I didn't buy a big giant thing of it. I was buying like one watermelon radish at one point. And the idea would be you cut off a little bit and throw it into a salad, right? The diversity doesn't have to come in a big volume. The idea is even a mouthful into your gut can make a difference. The other thing is to try to work on this idea that clean is somehow a moral virtue. Of course, we don't want to be living in filth, and we're coming out of this pandemic, hopefully. And so we've been very aware of germs and viruses. But when we surround ourselves with overly antiseptic environments, what happens, remember, I told you before, the good bacteria is very delicate. It doesn't take much for it to, all of a sudden poof and it goes away. The bad bacteria is very aggressive. It sticks around. This is why we have hospital superbugs, right? Because we get rid of most of the bacteria, but the biggest, baddest stuff sticks around. So the same thing happens when we try to clean environments in our home or in our person. So one of the big lessons I took away from this literature was I will never use mouthwash again after learning this. And I know at first you're like, oh my gosh, it's so, but it's killing all the bacteria. Remember, we don't have anything in science or health yet that just kills the bad stuff. So when you're choosing to kill bacteria, you're killing it all. And we don't want to kill the good stuff, right? So that goes for mouthwash, even things like thinking about sanitizer and bleach, right? A lot of us kind of the psychology of cleanliness is that we think, again, it's kind of morally superior to you want a perfectly clean home. And, I get a lot of that, but I just want you to just be a little bit more mindful about how you're exposing yourself to things like bleach wipes. So what I would say is if you use those in your home, to wear gloves when you use them, because the danger would be not only, your skin is your biggest organ and it's absorptive, but the problem is how many of us touch our eyes or go like this immediately after. And remember what I said, the microbiome is really in its most intense state where our body interacts with the environment. So your mucous membrane, that's how we get colds and viruses, right? Because things go into our mucous membranes. So we want to be really, really mindful of washing our hands, protecting our hands, and not touching our face after we use something as extreme as bleach. Eating more fiber. So remember, the fiber really feeds the good gut bacteria. So the 2 most helpful foods when you're thinking about fiber are in these two categories here. So we've got the, that first word is very long, oligosaccharides. So these are your fruits, vegetables, grains, and things like lentils. And then we've got resistant starch forms. So this kind of gets back to the supplement question where folks are, asking me, what can I do maybe instead of making a diet change? You can take fiber as a supplement, okay? That's, like Metamucil. If you're going to notice in the next few years, Metamucil is already starting to do this. They're totally repackaging themselves for brain health. So it used to just be like, hey, be more regular, drink your Metamucil, right? But now they're realizing that fiber is so important for brain health that they have a whole new marketing campaign. So what you want to try to do is get 20 to 60 grams of fiber a day. And some of these foods I think are going to surprise you when you learn that these are the highest fiber foods. So blueberries, pears. Do you think of pears as being a high fiber food? Watermelon, nectarines, garlic, leek, white onion, and scallion, and then white beans and lentils. Those are the foods that have the highest fiber that will benefit your gut health, okay? I always want to throw in the whole, prebiotics, probiotics. Some people might not know. So a prebiotic, they have them in supplement form, is basically a fiber that you can take before you eat. And the idea is that it kind of preps your gut to accept the good bacteria, right? So there's products out there that claim to be a prebiotic. Probiotics, what they're claiming is that they are actual bacteria or living organisms that benefit health. The problem is science has not determined what makes for a healthy bacteria. It's super, super complicated. So what is a good bacteria in me may not be a good bacteria in you, depending on our foundation of our gut, right? Isn't that something? With probiotics, one of the things that's really important is hypothetically for it to work, it would have to be a living bacteria, right? That's the whole idea, that you can shortcut the food process and just put the good bacteria right in your gut. Well, if the probiotic isn't refrigerated, there's no way that it can actually be alive without a preservative, and we don't put preservatives in supplements. So right there, I want you to start thinking a little bit differently about probiotics. Is this just another supplement that is potentially promising more than it can deliver? So the way I think about these things, what's much better is to actually get them through your food, right? If you can. Now, of course, there's sometimes we have dental issues that prevent us from chewing properly. Sometimes we have swallowing. I work with plenty of people who've had strokes or have dementia. Then you can start to think about supplementing, but I would think there too about trying to supplement like with juicing or something like that. I think by the time you get down to supplements, except for fiber, it's probably not giving you a lot of return. So what we think about in gut health is what would be the best way to start a meal. So we know prebiotics are good in theory, and we don't think you can get them from a pill. So that's where the onions, think about how many meals you've made, how many meals are being made all across the world right now that start off with onions and garlic, right? I mean, what's a better smell, right, than the oil? This is the best. And that's so interesting because the science tells us that is the very best way to start a meal. It's the best way to get your gut bacteria primed to accept some of the food that's going to come later when you pair things with fiber. So starting off meals with things like asparagus, artichoke, leeks, jicama, dandelion greens. So that's kind of on the early end of eating. And then one of the handouts you're going to get today is what we call the 10 gut powerhouses. And basically what that is the things that have living bacteria in them that you can take in your body to feed the good bacteria. So things like yogurt, right? Anything that has an alive bacteria in it. Miso soup is good, right? Kombucha. People even make their own kombucha nowadays. So as you leave today, Lynn's going to give you one of those handouts that goes through the top 10 foods that are good for you to eat. So you can kind of see them here. Kimchi. This is another simple change you can make when you go to the grocery store. Is nowadays for sour cream and cream cheese, you can actually buy one that has live cultures in it. Tastes the exact same. It's just something that is not alive versus something that is alive. Pickles, now they have to be refrigerated and fresh. They're not the Vlasic ones that you buy on aisle 7. They have to actually have, and you'll see, it's a marketing thing. So they want you to know that there's live cultures in there. And actually, a lot of cheeses have live culture. So I don't know about you, but any diet that includes cheese, I'm all for it. Okay, so we're going to do some questions and answers. Like I said, that was a little bit of an abbreviated version because we didn't have 2 hours to get into it together. But how many of you think a little differently now about bacteria? Yay! How many of you are motivated to want to make some changes to do a little bit better? I love it. I love it. What do you guys think is the easiest kind of first step to make a difference, do you think? More fiber, definitely, right? And then maybe the grass-fed dairy change. Go to the farmer's market, totally. Try to eat things you've never tried before, right? And even if you don't like them, remember, you don't have to have a ton of it. It's just like a salad is the perfect opportunity to, sprinkle in 3 or 4 different things, right? So it's kind of interesting once you start to think about nutrition and health, because where we're not at yet is an integrated understanding of how each different approach fits in with the other one. We're still like, eat this way for gut health, eat this way for diabetic health, eat this way for heart health, right? So I guess that's the way science starts. We do lanes first, but obviously we have to figure out, for you as an individual person, this is why personalized healthcare is so important, because I'll just take your example. So the difference between almond milk and oat milk is really interesting. So almond milk, I think, is way healthier. Oat milk tastes better. I'll give you that. But oat milk basically is a starch, and it's immediately transitioned into sugar by the body, whereas almonds have a lot more protein and some fiber. And so you're going to get more of the nutrition, because remember, the fiber just means you're getting more of the benefit of what you eat with it, right? So oat milk raises your blood sugar really quickly. You get a big spike, and it doesn't really feed anything. It doesn't stick around. There's no fiber, so it doesn't really stick around long enough. Now, if you eat oatmeal, that's different because there's high fiber. It's still pretty high carb, but it's definitely better because of the fiber. But like within those conversations about nut milks, it's more like about blood sugar or carbs, right? But they really haven't mapped it on yet to gut health. So this is why, if you have the opportunity to ever work with a really good nutritionist, I promoted this small business when I did the Ruth Pauley, and I'll say it again here. There's a business called Empowered Nutrition in Southern Pines. Has anybody worked with them before? So they take Medicare, Empowered Nutrition, and taking Medicare is like amazing, because very few truly progressive health interventions take Medicare, never mind insurance. So I would recommend them as a great place to start with your personal health goals, because you could have the goal of, I'm pre-diabetic and I want to try to reverse that. I want to try to have better gut health. I have Alzheimer's in my family, so I need to think about, maybe like fish oils. And so to me, you want to use your personal history and your personal goals, and then kind of customize your diet according to your personal stuff, because there's really no one size fits all.
What I'll try to do is I'll try to contact them to see if they can do a presentation, because that would really go nicely.
Yeah, they're really awesome. Yes, sir. Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, amoxicillin's an antibiotic. And so what I would say is, when you take an antibiotic, and this is one thing I had to cut for today, there's no point in taking the top 10 gut powerhouses while you're taking the antibiotic, because it's killing everything. That's its job, right? But on the last day you take your last dose, you should be going heavy with those, yogurt. You should have like 2 to 3 yogurts a day. Your job is to rebuild your gut because of how aggressive the harmful stuff is. If you're not feeding the good stuff, when your gut reestablishes itself, it could be 90% bad, right? And we just want it to be 51% good. We just want a little bit more composition in the good direction than the bad. You're never going to get rid of the bad. But yeah, that's a really important thing. And I wish that as doctors gave out antibiotics, we talked more about how to rebuild your gut after. Because, what they'll tell you is it might give you side effects like diarrhea. It's like, well, the reason you get diarrhea is because it's obliterating all the bacteria in your gut. And you feel kind of crummy too when you're taking antibiotics. Yes, ma'am? Oh, always with the wine. Somebody's always got a question with the wine. It really isn't a factor. I mean, it does turn into sugar ultimately, which feeds the bad stuff. But I would say being conscious of pairing it, like, that's where like cheese and wine sounds like a good combination because you've got the live cultures, right? Yeah. Cottage cheese, that's interesting. I am so against cottage cheese as a human being that I've never even looked into it. It's like my least favorite food. Is there live cultures in cottage cheese? I don't know. Does anybody know? I really don't know. I mean, it has to be refrigerated, so it's dairy, right? I don't know, Kay. You got to look into that one. Tell me what you find out. I don't know. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like this whole sour cream, because this is now becoming such a buzz in healthcare circles, anything that is alive, they're making sure they change the name or they put on the pack. So it makes it pretty easy. So first thing is it would have to be refrigerated to be alive, right? That's an easy distinction. And then you just look on the packaging and you just see if it says lactobacillus or, there's a million different active culture names. But the truth is, this is why the probiotics aren't a smart idea, because we don't know what should be in them to make them good, right? So remember I said before, like what's good to me might be bad to you. It's really even more complex than that. So what's good to me when I'm 5 might be bad to me when I'm 15 and good again to me when I'm 50 and bad again to me when I'm 80. It might be good to me depending on how stressed I am. It might be bad to me considering what I've eaten. So that's where science is really lacking. So maybe this is a really good way. I'll take more questions, but this is maybe a good way to tie a bow on everything. So the real way we know about a lot of this is people donate their stool in these research programs, and we analyze what's in the stool and we assume that that's what's going on in the gut, right? So, that's only taking a small amount of the population and analyzing what those people have done who volunteer for those research programs. And everything is so wildly diverse because we all eat such different things that we really haven't done the science yet to understand in like controlled double-blind studies what bacteria is going in result in the best short chain fatty acids and bad bacteria going out. But I alluded to this before with these fecal matter transplants. So they're FDA approved. If you go into the hospital and you get one of those super bugs called C. diff is a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. You can FDA, go to your doctor and get a prescription for a fecal matter transplant. So the idea is they clean you out like you're getting a colonoscopy, and then you actually get a transplant of someone else's sanitized fecal matter. And these people have something like a 95% cure rate for C. diff. So now we're starting to use it for things like colitis, things like diverticulitis, any other irritable bowel syndrome. We're kind of creeping in there. But there's also been a smattering of studies in the last 5 years that have looked at it in Parkinson's, stroke, Alzheimer's, essential tremor, even things like PTSD and depression. And what they're reporting, now they're very small studies because we haven't gotten to the point where we can really support them yet, but they're reporting amazing things. And if you understand the science of it, it actually makes sense that it would work. So if you're able to put more healthy gut bacteria in, you really can change the health of the brain. Now, is it realistic to think it's going to reverse any major problem? Probably not. but I have seen videos of people with tremor disorders before they had the transplant, and they were shaking pretty bad. And immediately after, and for up to 30 days after, their tremor was almost totally gone. So in the webinar I have on my website, I actually show that video. It's pretty compelling. So I really think there's something to it. And that's why, like I said, in 3 to 5 years from now, if you go in the hospital and you get a stroke, they're going to have different treatment options. And one of them might be talking to you about a fecal matter transplant. It's really interesting.
Before the next question, I just want to say there's an update I have looked up. And yes, there are certain brands of cottage cheese that do have live cultures.
Oh, look at that.
So just make sure you look at the packaging.
Nice. There you go. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, sir. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't love it. The only time it's like I could maybe think about it is like if someone can't swallow or they're on a, you know what I mean? There's people put those things in feeding tubes to create a, but the food is always going to be the better choice, you know? I have tried it. It's not the person. I mean, it's a matter of personal taste, but I don't know. The half and half in the coffee is the one place I'm just not willing to compromise. It's my life loses joy. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say, you know, you just have less surface area. So you got to think of like getting more bang for your buck of every bite of food you take, right? Because it matters more because there's less opportunity. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so like I'm thinking of people who've had weight loss surgeries. So a lot of times I'll see them as a memory doctor and they wind up having a malabsorption syndrome because they don't have enough surface area to process vitamin B, you know, the spectrum of vitamin B. So you have to be monitored closely by a doctor for your main micronutrients. And but that would be a great thing to me to go to the nutritionist and be like, here's what's unique about me. I had this surgery, and so how can I eat for maximum absorption? You know? Yes. Hi. Yeah, I know that's a heck of a one, right? So basically, you know, swish, 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 and you're just killing everything. So the concern is, remember what I said before, the brain cells aren't just actually in your gut. They start in your mouth and they go all the way down and around. So you would then not be giving the brain cells, you know, the good bacteria feed the brain cells. So you're basically starving the brain cells of nutrition and you're killing everything, right? The one thing I did want to look into recently, though, is I've noticed Listerine has a no alcohol line, and alcohol is what is killing the bacteria. So I don't know. I just thought of that yesterday at Walgreens. Because I do love a good Listerine swish, I have to say. It makes you feel like, hey, I'm doing something healthy here, and, you know. But yeah, a lot of nutritionists are very against mouthwash. That it's just too aggressive. It doesn't mean you shouldn't swish and swallow. I did read one research study that said it's actually very similar thought that goes into toothbrushing. There are some people that don't believe you need toothpaste. I haven't looked into this enough, but the idea is what really helps is the friction. And they liken it to kind of like shoveling snow, and the toothbrush is just the shovel. You don't need to put, you know, perfume on the shovel. It's the actual mechanical activity of getting out the molecules from the teeth. I still use toothpaste though, but still. Yes. So I'm a neuropsychologist, and for 10 years, I kind of saw all comers. I mean, I'm always adult, so 18 plus. But because I'm kind of the only game in town and my wait list was really getting to be ridiculous, in the last year, I've transitioned to mostly seeing people over 55 who are worried about dementia. I'll see anybody who's had a brain health diagnosis, though, so Parkinson's, stroke. And if any of you come up to me and say, I have a special, I mean, I'm always going to say yes. But in terms of like when doctors were, so we get our referrals from primary care and neurology mostly. And so when we get them, if they're under 55, we send back a little note that's like, you know, am I really the best person for this? But my interest is in age-related memory loss, so dementia. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding is that, and this is another point of controversy, is that that's really hard too, right? So I think what you're talking about is you basically send in a stool sample and then they send you back a data graph of what kind of, okay. So the problem is though, all you're really excreting is what you ate the day before. So that only kind of, so a lot of people say that's a waste of money because it's not like your underlying biology is being tested. It's like the end product of what you eat. So if you ate the same meal every day, that would make sense. But we eat so many, you know what I mean? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. There's a whole body of literature of people that believe that depression is a gut health problem. And when you fix the gut, and it kind of, remember the final thing I said in my list of what the problem is? I said a psyche that never calms. I mean, what's anxiety and depression except feeling like you're not at peace in your own body? So I just think if that's you and you've struggled with that, that's why I said at the beginning of the talk, there's hope for me here. And it's not hope that has side effects. It's not high risk. It's, you will feel better when you eat this way. You'll feel like you sleep better, you have better energy, and you will be calmer. It's just really basic science. Oh God, stress is so, it's really, I could do like a 25-hour talk on stress in the brain. I mean, it's what the problem is, we're just so stressed out. It's just so chronic. We have accepted a new norm of stress that's really, really, really unhealthy and abnormal. It's really messed up how we think it's normal to live like this when it's not. And like, you know, scrolling on our phone and we're doing stuff constantly that's like, there's not enough time. And so just really letting your nervous system be able to relax is a huge benefit. Like really, you know, being in nature more. I mean, some of the very basic things about living a good life. Oh, you need the contrast of feeling relaxed to know how stressed you've been. And I mean, I would say, all right, let's just actually do this, right? If you're totally honest with yourself, would you describe yourself as a chronically stressed person? Ooh, I got to hang out with you. She's like, nope, not me. I mean, I would definitely say I don't like that, but it's like, okay, I work a lot. I've got a lot of family stuff, a lot of work. It's like it's kind of the hamster on the wheel mentality, you know, and it's all wrapped up in like achievement and what we think we're supposed to do. And, you know, it's the whole thing about like, you want to be a human being, not a human doing. I think about that all the time.
Can I interject for something too?
Yeah.
We did have a brain talk earlier in the year, and we watched a video, and they were talking about the benefits of meditation, which will help with the stress and help with the brain. And so we do have 2 meditation programs here, once a month, something called The Hue, and then the other one is every Fridays. It's free. You don't have to have a membership here to come, and that's at noon with Maureen. So there's 2 ways. There's Tai Chi. We have lots of Tai Chi opportunity here and in the area. But those are 3 ways that are really good. And I will leave now.
Well, that's a perfect segue for me to toot Lynn's horn for a second, because, you know, I think it was maybe about a year ago you emailed me and you said, I want to bring more brain health to the Senior Enrichment Center. And I was like, you go, Lynn. And so she is such a thoughtful and resourceful programmer. Like what this woman gets on the schedule for this place is absolutely incredible. And it's either, yay! And it's either free or low cost. So on your way out, grab a calendar and look on there. I mean, self-expression, healing, stress reduction. She's really trying to do it all. And a lot of the stuff in the last year feedback to brain health. Definitely. Yeah. Oh, you would like to ask me a question, would you? I know her. That's why I can talk to her that way.
Here you go. Taking, now I forget.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Maybe like, oh gosh, apple cider vinegar.
I read an article
Yeah.
that said that it helps digestion regardless of what you have. Oh, I didn't talk into it.
Apple cider vinegar. So what I'm reading about it is it helps digestion by reducing the glucose spike after you drink it. So what they say is like a 1 ounce of apple cider vinegar and like 8 ounces of water before you eat. And then if you track how glucose is absorbed, instead of getting a spike, it's like rounded a little bit more. So I don't necessarily know about that mapping onto gut health in terms of bacteria, but it reduces the sugar, which feeds the bad bacteria. So I've been thinking about messing around with apple cider vinegar. I don't know, the taste is kind of with mother on it, right? Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Right. I read about that to drinking dill pickle juice that it has a lot of like potassium and sodium. So if you're having muscle cramps, that's one of the things with the low carb diet. That's what I was complaining to Lynn about. I got my salt water over there. I'm like, oh, my muscles are killing me because you hold a lot of water with carbs. And if you don't eat carbs, like I have some pretty bad leg cramps right now, and they always say, listening. Bye.
For your YouTube.
Oh, it's right up
I
there.
thought you were my daughter.